Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and we are here for my LEC Week 1 Winter Split overview, analysis, and of course, at the end, my updated power rankings. Now, I do want to preface this a little bit quickly at the beginning of this video. These videos are typically going to be coming out on Wednesday of each week. Unfortunately, this week, it's going to be coming out on Thursday because I had to get those LCS power rankings out before the season started, but this is actually coming out a day later in the week than I will normally have it. So for the next 2 weeks of the winter split, they're going to be coming out on the Wednesday, but this week you're going to be getting it on Thursday, and that means we got to jump back all the way to the weekend to talk about some of these games in the LEC, but they are absolutely worth it, as a lot of them were really fun and really interesting. Remember, every regular season game means a lot more now because you've only got one round robin before two teams are completely cut out, and then you jump into the new format. And so every single game against every single team is really your only shot to get a win against that team before the regular season, the first part of the regular season ends. So very important to get out to a strong start, which means week 1 is incredibly important. So before we jump into the video, of course, as per usual, let me know down in the comment section below what you thought of the LEC in week 1. I'm going to be going through every single game here. I'm going to be going over my player of the game, my dud of the game, and then at the end, I'll be giving my updated power rankings. Let me know what your thoughts were on a lot of these games in week 1. A lot of really interesting things that were predictable, and some that I definitely did not predict. So excited to go over that. Now, I am going to talk about this. For those of you who do watch my Eastern recaps, these Western ones are going to be a tad bit different, if only just because, obviously, it's best of 1 and not best of 3. So I can't spend 8 to 10 minutes talking about one game and expect the video to be all that entertaining. These segments are going to be a little bit shorter. I'm hoping for about 4 to 5 minutes per game. And so definitely not going to be as long, hopefully. That's fingers crossed the way this goes, especially considering we've got to talk about 15. So let's kick it right off. Let's start with day number 1 here of week 1 in the LEC Winter Split. And we kicked off day number 1 with the matchup I was most looking forward to in the week, the battle of the top 2 teams in my power rankings in the preseason. And honestly, it did not live up to expectations. It was pretty one-sided in a particular direction. Kicking off the season, we had Excel taking on G2 Esports. And while I do think this was a relatively fun game, at least at the start, if only because G2 made it fun, Excel just did not show up here today. I'll kind of give a breakdown as to why, but let's talk about G2 first. This is basically exactly what you wanted to see from this G2 team kicking off the season. Not only were the biggest question marks going to be Yike entering this team as a rookie, never having played in the LEC, and being given a ton of responsibility, but also Hansama and Mickey really needed some bounce-back seasons after both of them kind of had tumultuous 2022s for different reasons. And so you were really looking at this G2 team and hoping that a lot of that could click, but maybe not expecting it to click so early. Well, looking at this game number 1, who were the 3 players that really stood out and really carried the team, in my opinion? It was absolutely Yike in the jungle. I think at one point he was like 6k gold up on Xerxes, something absolutely ludicrous on the Graves. And then it was Hansama and Mickey who absolutely dominated this bot lane matchup. It's super fun to get that Ashe Heimerdinger. I think it's a really difficult lane to play into and honestly gives a lot of options for the team that picks it. Patrick wants to go for the Varus. That's been a very common answer to Heimer in general, but also to Ashe, so I do understand. And then Targamas actually goes for the Jhin here, the Jhin counter pick that we've kind of been seeing a rise in popularity in solo queue. Obviously, Barrel popularized it in the LCK, and so they're going to go for that in game number 1, and it does not work for Excel. Hans and Mickey jump out to a really strong lead in the bot lane. They basically have the push the entire game when they really have no right to. I'll talk about that a bit when we get to Excel, but Hans and Mickey do a really good job of asserting dominance, even in a matchup that I think they generally lose, at least on paper, and so very, very good from G2. Pretty much exactly what you wanted to see from a bot lane that really needs to step up for G2 to be the best team in the league. They absolutely did step up in this game, but it was a really easy choice for player of the game for me. It's going to go to Yike on this Graves. I mean, he was absolutely dominant. It's very rare to see a rookie come into the LEC and immediately make such a strong impact, but Yike gets his Graves. It's a pick that he's very good on, obviously very comfortable on. I really like Graves in this draft. I think there are a lot of good targets on the enemy team that you're able to capitalize on, most notably, obviously, the Wukong, but also the Cassante. I think Graves does relatively well into that, especially when you're going to pair that up with something like a Jax that Yeah, we'll talk about Broken Blade in a bit. If there was a weakness on this team, I do think it was that Jax, but Yike is just able to generate so much pressure on the map, so much more than what Xerxes is able to offer, that the game was never close. It was basically out of control by the 10 to 15 minute mark because this Graves just started snowballing. This is basically exactly what you wanted to see, like I said, from Yike. I don't think you could ask for a better debut from a player that really has high expectations coming into the LEC this year. He's going to have to be one of the best junglers in the league for G2 to be one of the best teams in the league, and in game number 1, at the very least, he definitely showed that. Caps was fine here on the Victor, was more of a facilitator for the Graves, but that's a really nice role for Caps to slip into. Obviously, he's a great carry player. He can facilitate just as well. There's a reason he's the best mid laner and the best player of all time in LEC history, in my opinion. Really, the only negative I would give G2 in this game was Broken Blade. I thought he got pretty hard outplayed by Hodawamne pretty much the entirety of this game, but didn't really matter. The rest of his team won, and so he ends up winning the game. As for Excel on the other side, you got to be a little bit worried because mentality-wise, I think you're looking at this team and you're going, it might just be a lot of role players. Now, I love VTO to death, and I think VTO can be a superstar, but he has to have this kind of takeover mentality. He has to try and win these games because players like Odo, while he had a great game and really dominated Broken Blade up on the top side, he wasn't going to win this game on Cassante by himself. A player like Xerxes has never really been one to take advantage of early deficits and early leads and create these big mismatches. He's someone who has typically liked to play for the late game. And then Patrick and Targamas are really not this big, strong side. Patrick has never really been the one that is pushing the tempo. He's usually the one that is capitalizing on the tempo being pushed. And again, another great team fighter. That's kind of been the idea behind this Excel team. You're really relying on VTO to be this early game facilitator, this early game playmaker. And when you put him on something like Syndra, it just takes a lot of the onus off of this team. And we absolutely saw that in game number 1, where it really felt like Excel was so ridiculously passive and they just played so slow, especially in the bottom lane. This is pretty much inexcusable to me. I think both Patrick and Targamas played really, really bad in this game. There's really no other way to put it. I think you could give the dud of the game to either. I'm going to give it to Targamas on this Jhin, because I think the onus was on him a little bit more to step up and actually try to contest this Heimerdinger. Instead, they basically completely forfeited the laning phase and just got to the late game down like 4k gold and just lost. And that's not what you wanted to see. This was kind of the part of the map that you needed to play through. Patrick and Targamas really needed to step up in this one, and they just weren't able to do that. So even if Hodawamne had a really, really good game, big credit to Odo, it just was not enough for Excel to win. So what does this mean for both teams? Well, for Excel, again, I just need to see some more aggression. I need to see less passiveness. VTO is really the one that I'm going to be looking at to be getting these more aggressive picks. Perhaps not the Syndra. You yourself banned out the Akali in this game. I would love to see something like that for VTO, at least to start off the year. It gives him a lot of agency in the laning phase and still allows him to carry the game once you get to those late game team fights, because you know that a player like Patrick, a player like Odo, those players are going to show up if you get to 20 minutes relatively even. You just need to make sure you have some level of aggression and anticipation for plays in the early game to get there, because right now it just didn't feel like you were going to have that. For G2, on the other hand, this is basically the perfect start. With Broken Blade aside, Yike looked fantastic, Hans and Mickey looked fantastic, Caps facilitated. This is exactly what you wanted to see from G2. It is incredibly likely to me that this is the best team in the LEC right now, at least going into the year, especially with what they showed in game number 1. And, you know, if that's the case, if G2's reigning atop of Europe again, then I guess something has to be right in the world. Moving on to game number 2 here of day 1 in the LEC week 1, and it's an interesting matchup. Obviously, a top team versus a bottom team, the top team versus the bottom team from last year. It's going to be interesting to see how these two teams have changed in 2023. We had a matchup between Koi and Team BDS, and Koi is able to win it. No surprise here. I think a lot of people went into this definitely expecting Koi to be able to pick up the victory, and they absolutely did. They actually looked pretty good doing so. They played their exact style, basically, from last year, if not for at least a little bit of a hiccup in the mid-game, which we'll talk about. But starting with Koi, death, taxes, and a Malrang level 2 gank. I mean, what is more predictable in this, you know, in LEC environment than Malrang just running around doing the same thing that he has done for over a year and no one really being able to do anything about it? Credit to Adam, he at least knew it was coming. He played like it was coming. He just couldn't do anything about it. He either lost lane from being entirely forced off against a Renekton as Olaf, or he dies to the level 2 gank from Sejuani and loses lane that way. Like, it felt like such a lose-lose in the top lane for Adam, and there was really nothing he could do about it. Malrang was just going to get the gank off, and he was going to win the game. Now, obviously, Adam probably should have been a little bit more passive. It's probably better to give up the wave there and to just play safe. You know that Malrang's going to be topside. Clearly, you were playing somewhere in the middle. Obviously, Malrang does a really good job of just outplaying him, but you could have made that a lot more difficult, I would say, overall for the Sejuani if you had played a little bit safer. So we'll get to Adam in a bit, but Malrang is going to get my player of the game. He just controls the early game so well. It is so predictable, the kind of leads that Koi is able to get into in the early game and how little it is able to be stopped by the other team. Really how little there is to do. Koi is always sitting there at small 1, 2k gold leads at 15 minutes, and then they're just able to expedite that out of control. Now, credit to BDS. They actually kept up for a majority of this game. I actually really liked how Sheo played in the mid game, making sure that Malrang really wasn't able to snowball the game out of control. On this Vi, which can be a pretty difficult pick to actually play into the Sejuani, especially when you have something like a Renekton, something really safe like an Ezreal, you really don't have a lot of chances to lock anybody down in the early game. You don't have a lot of gank targets. I thought Sheo actually did a really good job of making his opportunities count. And credit to BDS in that regard, but unfortunately, BDS is going to BDS. And eventually they throw at Baron. It's just kind of what happens. The bad teams will hang in there. They have the mechanical skill to keep up. But eventually they will get overcome by the inevitable urge to throw the game away to the better team for some reason or another. And Koi is able to survive another day. So Malrang is my player of the game, but I think you could give a lot of credit to Comp here as well. Not only did he survive 4 AD carry bans, Lucian, Caitlyn, Zeri, Sivir, all off the board, but he still gets a comfort pick here in Ezreal, and he plays really well on it. Ezreal Ashe as a lane combo is so ridiculous and so funny to look at that honestly, it's just kind of insane what kind of meta we live in 2023, but it ends up working out. Trimby plays pretty well here on the Ashe. He's able to set up Comp, and Comp is actually able to just win all the late game team fights here on the Ezreal. When you can do a lot of damage on that champion, he can really, really do a lot of damage. And playing into a more control-oriented, a more utility-style AD carry in the Jhin, there really wasn't going to be a lot of damage on the side of BDS to be able to counter that in a lot of these late game team fights. So credit to Malrang, credit to Comp. Those were the two players that I think really stood out for Koi the most. As for BDS, I do have to give dud of the game to somebody, so it is going to go to Adam. I actually don't think Adam played all that bad. He played pretty okay on the Olaf. He definitely sensed the Malrang level 2 gank coming. He had clearly done his homework. It just wasn't enough. He didn't give enough respect, and from that point onward in the game, BDS was playing on the back foot. And then eventually you get to that Baron throw. It's really hard to know who to blame for that, because it is just a call on the side of BDS that goes wrong. I'm not exactly sure who's making a lot of the shot calling decisions, etc., but it doesn't quite go their way. So what does it mean for BDS overall? Well, they look okay. Honestly, I would have expected them to get kind of rolled by Koi, and they did not get rolled. They gave up some early leads, but they were able to keep themselves in the game, fight back a little bit, and it was a late mistake that cost them, but this was a lot better than I expected this team to look. I thought they were clear-cut the worst team in the LEC going into 2023. I think they showed signs of life that maybe I didn't expect, most notably Sheo in the jungle. I know his score doesn't exactly say it, but he kept up with Malrang for a lot of the mid to early game. Malrang does a really good job of being able to take those leads and just turn, a 1k into a 2k, a 2k into a 4k, 4k into an 8k. That's kind of what Malrang does incredibly successfully. Sheo did a really good job of stopping that from happening, making sure that he was in the right place at the right time to keep the game in check. It was just everybody else on the team that wasn't really stepping up. The Jhin wasn't doing a ton of damage. Nuke on the Azir just wasn't really dominating any of these team fights. It wasn't a super inspiring performance, but at the end of the day, keeping up with a team like Koi is definitely something to be proud of. As for Koi, winning the game is what really matters. You start the season 1-0, even if it's not the most impressive win in the world. Like I said, a very similar story to what you had at parts of last year, where yes, you're winning the game because you were able to generate a really strong early lead, but you could definitely clean up a lot of the mid game. It really felt like they were just kind of sitting, waiting for something to happen. They were essentially waiting for BDS to throw the game, and lucky for them, they did, but I want to see more aggression out of this team. This was something that they really picked up in playoffs and towards Worlds, where they started to play a lot more aggressive in the mid game, started to take a lot more risks, and they were able to compound their advantages a little bit more. That's not really what they were doing in this game. I just want to see a little bit more proactivity from Koi in the future. But still, a win's a win, and you're going to be happy to start off your season as the defending champs with a W. Moving on to game number 3 here of day 1. Another interesting one that I'm kind of excited to talk about. Obviously, all these early games are pretty exciting because we finally get to see how these rosters work together. We had Astralis taking on Team Heretics, and Heretics' first ever LEC game, and guess what? The LEC gods bless them with a victory, a debut victory for Heretics. I think that's huge for them. Obviously, this is an organization that has come in with a really interesting lineup, with really interesting expectations. Maybe they're a top team, maybe they're not. You know, obviously, we'll see how it goes, but everything looked pretty good in this matchup against Astralis, a team that, well, they're not great. They have a number 9 in my power rankings. They're certainly not complete and utter pushovers. They do have LEC level talent on this team, and I think Heretics did make them look rather silly in this game. So let's go ahead and talk about where Heretics went right. The biggest win for me is draft. I think that's the first thing I want to say. I love the draft here for Heretics. Not only do I like really pinching the ADC pool hard after Astralis, you know, almost egos and doesn't take it in first rotation. That's Caitlyn, Lucian, Ezreal, Zeri, Varus, all gone. You're actively putting Kabe on a weaker AD carry, and Kabe absolutely was this team's win condition last year, at least especially towards the late game. So not only are you doing that, you're really pinching the opponent, making sure that he has to play the Xayah here, which I would consider a relatively weak AD carry, especially compared to a lot of the other ones. But also, you see the Ryze, you know, you see the Ashe, you go for the Cassiopeia, and I really, really like Cass here. I think Cass is honestly a really underrated pick in the meta right now. Cass does really well into these more side lane, I don't want to say immobile mages, but things like the Ryze, obviously something like the Syndra comes to mind as well that I really like Cass as a matchup into. This is a pick that I really, really want to see more as a counter pick on red side, and Ruby pulls it out here, and he dominates. I mean, he just completely outclasses Dior in basically every single aspect of the game. Ruby is probably the easiest choice for player of the game so far, not because, you know, everybody else on his team played bad, but because Ruby honestly just looked fantastic. I was a little bit lower on Ruby going into the season, although I did see promise on him. I thought he was the best player on UOL Sexy Edition last year. I just didn't really expect him to be able to click immediately, especially on a team that does, relatively speaking, have expectations. I thought this was going to be a team that either played towards top or bot, with Ruby playing a more passive role early on. But it's really interesting to see Ruby play a very similar style to what he was playing a lot of last year on UOL, but with just better talent around him, right? You've got Evie in the top lane who played fantastic on this Cassante. Obviously, the teleport at Rift Herald was hilarious. You've got Yankos here on the Vi. Typically, I'm not going to tell teams to pick Vi. I've talked about that a lot on this channel. I think Vi is a little bit of a trap pick, but when, you know, what is the situation to pick Vi when you know you're the better team and when you know specifically that you're the better jungler? And in this game, obviously, Yankos going into 1-1-3, I think he felt pretty confident that he was going to be able to get away with that. And then Jack Spectre and Mursa played well. I thought Mursa, especially here on the Karma, continued to look good. But this really was Ruby on the Cassio and then a little bit of Evie on the Cassante. Really, really solid game from Heretics. Basically the perfect way for them to kick off their season. And then you've got Astralis on the other side. Again, I think you just got outdrafted super hard here. Having to ban Maokai on blue side, having to ban Yuumi on blue side, like, these are bad looks, I would say, overall for you. These are things that I would expect you to want to pick up, and I don't really understand why you feel the need to ban them on blue side, but it is what it is. Kabe gets stuck on Xayah. You're playing Xayah Ashe. That is a super passive bot lane that can absolutely be exploited for pressure early, and even though I do think they played well late, Kabe gets put on this Xayah. He's really not able to do as much damage as he needs to. Perhaps if he's on a harder carry champion towards the back half of this game, it can be more interesting. But really the biggest problems for Astralis, like I already noted, were the solo lanes. Dior got completely run over by Ruby. Very easy choice for dud of the game. His Ryze was completely irrelevant. This game makes me think he might just be the worst player in the LEC right now. It is certainly up for debate. He wasn't good at all last year. Obviously, I was hoping that he was going to develop a bit, someone who really hadn't had a ton of pro league experience before joining Astralis. It just hasn't seemed to click so far, and you know, Finn playing pretty poorly. That was their big addition this offseason. Obviously, Finn in 1-1-3 coming in. Finn was supposed to be the stable top side. He picks the Fiora here and just kind of gets run over by Evie on the Cassante. It just really wasn't all that close. Ironically, 1-1-3 played okay. I thought his early game in particular on the Viego was pretty solid, but pretty typical for 1-1-3. He had a really solid early game, and then everything just fell apart towards the mid game. That's basically exactly what happened on K-Corp over the past year, and so for Astralis, I hate to say it, this is kind of exactly how I thought they would look. Kabe and Jonghoon are strong in the bottom lane, but they were targeted heavily not only in draft, but in the game as well, and it didn't really matter how well they played. The rest of the team was a little bit too heavy to carry, especially Dior, who really just looks like a complete hindrance towards this Astralis team. I think if they don't fix things up relatively quickly, this team's going to be in trouble. Obviously, only single round robin here. I can't stress that enough. until two teams are knocked out. Astralis is in a very dangerous spot of being one of those two teams with how they looked here in game number 1. And then Heretics, really solid start to the year. Obviously, you're not beating up some super giant team or anything like that, but for a player like Ruby to come out and show such a good performance in his first game, for Evie to look super comfortable, for Jack Spectra and Mursa to be clicking pretty well, Mursa especially, I think, clicked well with this team. A lot of the question marks for Heretics, I think, showed up in this one, and I think you're going to be walking out of this performance relatively happy if you're a Heretics fan. Moving on to game number 4 here of day 1. Another interesting one, too. I hate to say that, but all these games are interesting to start the season. It feels like I'm just repeating myself. But really, all of them are interesting to talk about. All of them have really interesting little tidbits, and this one is certainly no exception, as we had Mad Lions taking on SK Gaming. And Mad Lions is able to pick up the win. Now, this is no surprise to a lot of people. What the surprise is how incompetent SK looked in terms of macro in this game. This was not something I was expecting. I actually liked this SK team quite a bit going into the year. I know I had them ranked 8th, but that's because I think a lot of teams in the LEC were interesting going into the year. I liked what I saw out of SK on paper. It did not show up in this game even a little bit. Draft is interesting, but man, did they not perform. Let's talk about Mad first and foremost, though. Oh my god, is it actually going to work? Did they look at Top Esports bringing in Mark and Jackie Love and having those two just absolutely dominate by being so ridiculously aggressive together that they can't lose, and replicate that with Carzzy and Hylissang in the LEC? Maybe, because this looked stellar in game number 1. Carzzy and Hilly looked unstoppable on the Lucian Nami. I can't stress this enough. That bot lane is so ridiculously broken. I saw a lot of people, in the comment section of the video, in the Twitch chat being like, oh, yay, Zeri Yuumi lose. Yay, Zeri Yuumi lose. I feel like Zeri Yuumi isn't even the bot lane that I'm most upset by in the meta right now. It absolutely is Lucian Nami. I understand that Zeri Yuumi is a little less interactive, but Lucian Nami is just so much better than everything else in the game right now that it almost feels unfair to play against. And I think Carzzy and Hylissang did show off a little bit of that power this game. Carzzy is actually going to get my player of the game here. This is a fantastic bounce back from what was a really disastrous year last year on Vitality. Same for Hylissang, really, towards the end of summer on Fnatic. He had a great spring and awful summer. It's really good to see these two players who both have these ridiculously aggressive and all-in mentalities come together, get to play a really aggressive mid-game, bot lane duo, and really capitalize on it and play it really well. Ton of credit to Nisqy in this game as well on the Victor. I think Broadcast gave MVP to Nisqy. I totally understand why his Victor was sensational in lane, in particular against Certus. He made sure to be basically at every play before Certus was, which is relatively awful for this Kassadin, even after SK was able to get the first Drake. Obviously, I'm going to dogpile onto the obvious trend here, but I gotta talk about it in the recap. This is a team comp with Kassadin, Zeri, Yuumi on the side of SK Gaming. You are going to win every single team fight, even just after level 11. Once you get to that point, it's going to be very difficult. You have Vi for lockdown on the Lucian. You have K'Sante to stand in the front line. Like, you have ways to win these fights relatively easily if you just don't throw early, and they throw everything away to try and contest second Drake when they already have the first. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. It's an awful decision. I'm not really sure who made it, but Nisqy capitalizes on that really well. He's able to generate a huge lead, and Kassadin is never really able to come back in the game. And so those three players to me were absolutely the big standouts for Mad Lions here. Nisqy looking great in the matchup against Certus, in Victor into Kassadin, which isn't particularly fun to play if you get to that late game. And then Carzzy and Hylissang just look like absolute madmen. Their aggression absolutely paying off in this game. Chasey and Elioyo were fine as well, just not really worth talking about. As for SK Gaming, like I said, just a lot of bad decisions. You're actually in a pretty decent spot after the early game. Yes, it's not perfect, but Zeri has gold, and you're going to be able to scale into the late game. You've got a Kassadin, you've got a Zeri. I mean, these late game team fights are basically won for you as long as you get there with, like, at worst, like a 2k deficit, right? But you're not able to do that. Whoever makes the call to go in on that second dragon, the game is basically over from that point. And I gotta say, Marcoon looks awful. He looked really, really bad in this game on the Vine. Now, again, I've talked about this. If you're the worst jungler, which Marcoon is worse than Elioya, even me, one of the bigger Marcoon fans in the entire league, will tell you that Marcoon is worse than Elioya. Don't pick Vi. You're not going to be able to accomplish anything in the early game, and her late game impact is negligible. I understand you don't want them to pick Vi into Zeri, but I mean, like, come on. Like, this feels like such a no-brainer to me. This pick has consistently underperformed in pretty much every single region that it has been played in, and I just don't understand why people keep picking it. Marcoon picks it this game, completely runs it in a lot of team fights, really isn't accomplishing anything. He's going to get my dud of the game. Really bad start to the year for him. I have faith and hope that he'll be able to turn it around eventually, but it was not to be in this week, or in this game in particular. And I think you could say the same thing about Certus. Certus played really bad in this game on the Castle and got completely run over by Niski in particular, who just was better than him by a large margin. Certus on the Kassadin was something I was actually really excited to see in draft, because Certus has always played these really aggressive late game team fight carry assassins well. That's kind of how he plays his Akali anyways. He's not really all that aggressive in the early game. He wants to wait until he hits that late game power spike and then try to win the game from there. But I don't know, man. He built tier on Kassadin at like 20 minutes in. He didn't even stack it all the way. Like, what's the point? What are we doing here? The mid-jungle duo looks completely lost. Bot lane kind of got run over, although that was a little bit more expected. Exakick and Doss, coming up, 2 rookies that they're probably going to need some time to develop. And then Irrelevant was appropriately named this time on the top side with the Cassante. Just not a lot you can do from the top side. So what does SK Gaming need to do? Well, their jungle mid just needs to get better. They were really, really awful this game. I'm not sure who was making the decisions to contest and to try and fight around these objectives early in the game when you have a scaling comp. But whoever was, I'm sure they got talked to after the game by the coach. I'm sure it was a don't do this again kind of moment, and hopefully they'll be able to learn and grow from it. Marcoon hopefully can get back to the form that we've known him to be in the last year and a half, and Certus has shown good things in the past. Just wasn't a good game from him. On the side of Mad Lions, this is basically exactly how you want to start the season. Reigning MVP Niski looks great, not even really in this shove and roam style that he was kind of known for last year, but on a more team fight oriented style with the Victor here, really like that. And then obviously this bot lane just looked fantastic. They were the stars of this game for pretty much everybody in my opinion. This was a perfect start to the year for Mad. Basically everything that you wanted to go right in game number 1, everything you wanted to at least see was possible when you constructed this team in the offseason, ended up coming true in this one. That brings us to our 5th and final game of day 1 here in week 1, and it was probably the most interesting game of the day, maybe outside of the opener, but even then, still, like, on paper, I was real excited to watch this one. We had Team Vitality taking on Fnatic, and Vitality was able to pick up the win here. Now, this was no surprise to me. I knew that Vitality was going to be a pretty solid team. I just wasn't quite sure how solid they were going to be at the start. Obviously, they have a ridiculous amount of potential, but it might not be potential. It might be talent. It might be here already. We might not have to wait long to see the best version of this Vitality team, because everything was clicking against a Fnatic team that I think was really amped up for this game and was really looking for a win. Perks versus Fnatic always delivers, and I definitely think this was a good example of that. But when talking about Vitality, it wasn't the Perks show. This is not 2022 anymore. It's not Perks carrying this Vitality roster. This top side went nutty. It was so good. I think you could give the player of the game to either of the 2 players on the top side here, either Photon or Bo. Bo gets it on broadcast, totally understand. He completely controlled the game on this Graves. Very similar to the game we saw earlier from Yike, but not nearly as much invested into him. It was really a lot of him just outplaying everybody else in the game. I think you could make a really solid argument that he was the best player in terms of the macro sense of this game and just being able to control the tempo and being able to make sure that Fnatic really had no opportunities to get back into it. He outplayed Razork so spectacularly in this marksman versus marksman jungle matchup that it makes me wonder why people aren't picking Graves more. It's not really a pick that was on the radar for me, but we've seen people really perform at a high level when it is picked. Obviously, Graves-Jax as a duo in particular is very strong at dueling, at creating these little skirmishes on top side, especially when you add in something like a Rise that can be there if you need him to be, especially towards the mid game. There's a lot to like, I would say, overall about the Vitality draft, but it was really how Bo played it, and for me, in this game in particular, how Photon played it that really separated Vitality for me. Photon's going to get my player of the game. He is everything I wanted to see and more. I felt very confident that Bo was going to enter the LEC and pretty immediately be one of the best junglers in the league. I talked about that in my power rankings video. I know I ranked him pretty low in terms of junglers, but that was mostly just because I think his floor was technically lower than the others. I didn't really expect someone to drop down in the same way that I think Bo could theoretically drop down, but Bo had the talent and the potential to be number 1. Basically from week 1, I said it in my Vitality ranking. And Photon was someone who I was really hoping to see the best of when the season started, and man, did it work out here. He gets the Jax, and he styles on Wonder. There's really no other way to put it. He was better than Wonder, he was better than Razork, he was better than Fnatic, and in my opinion, he was the standout player from this game. I know the narrative has kind of been surrounding Bo when it comes to Vitality, but for me, Photon is just as big of a deal on the top side for this team, and I really think it's going to be a huge nuisance to have to deal with those two. And it's not like you have schmucks on the rest of this roster. You have maybe the best support in the region. You had the runner-up for MVP last year for me, and you've got an AD carry that's really good at playing for late game. Like, this is an incredibly well-rounded, solid roster. If you have two superstars on the top side here in Photon and Bo, I mean, Vitality just might be the best team in Europe and one of the best teams in the world. Like, they really do have that kind of upside. That's what they were able to show me in this game. As for Fnatic, rough start to the year. This game was relatively close for a bit. They were making some plays back and forth. I actually really liked how this bot lane played for the most part. Reckless and Rux, I think, were a bot lane that I was a little bit worried about going into the year. I talked about that a lot in my Fnatic power rankings, but I do think they showed a lot of signs of life, most especially Rux. I actually thought he looked really, really good here. For the most part, one play notwithstanding, I'm not going to talk about the time where he flashes into 4 people, only to get point-and-click CC'd by Ryze, just so he could try to knock up a Leona. Like, very weird play, but outside of that, he was honestly pretty fantastic on this recon. And Reckless was doing a pretty decent job of following up. Obviously, the scoreline doesn't tell you that. Humanoid was making some movements in the mid lane. He was getting the push for the most part because Vitality was spending so much time topside trying to get Photon ahead. Humanoid was given a lot of resources and was able to do stuff with them, but it was really some plays in the mid game that they were just a little bit too over-eager, a little bit too over-aggressive on. That cost Fnatic, most notably trying to chase down Bo and then just all getting caught. It really felt like, regular season Humanoid again. That was kind of the performance he was giving last year. My dud of the game is going to go to Razork in the jungle. I think he just got outplayed by Bo in pretty much every category. I'm going to talk about the Kindred pick just for a little bit. Obviously, Kindred is absolutely bonkers broken in solo queue right now. I'm not going to dispute that in any regard. Kindred is nuts in solo queue, but we've really not seen that champion do anything but feed at a pro level. I'm not exactly sure if I'm at the point where I'm like, stop picking it, but I certainly don't think it's this big power pick like solo queue might lead you to believe. I think Razork is a good example of that. Once he got behind, there simply was absolutely nothing he could do in this game. Wonder was losing on the top side. Humanoid had some gold, but it's Syndra. How much can you really do into Jax? And then Reckless and Rux were playing okay, but Reckless certainly didn't have the gold to keep up in terms of damage. Fnatic was just in a place where they had to hope a lot of things went right. They tried a crazy play in the mid lane. It did not go, and then Jax really just took over. And so, really good game from Vitality. Not really a lot to complain about. Photon and Bo look fantastic. They were the big question marks for this team. If this continues to click, they're going to be one of the best, if not the single best team in Europe, maybe one of the best teams in the world. For Fnatic, a rough first loss. I do think there are bright spots to look at, most notably Rux. I do really like how he played. I think there is a lot of good to take away from this recon performance, but this is basically the Fnatic I was expecting. Yes, I think it's, the power points are shifted onto players that I didn't expect, but in terms of the overall package, Fnatic's probably going to be a good team this year, but maybe not a good enough one to be able to compete for an LEC trophy. Jumping into day 2 action now, we kick off day 2 with a snooze fest of a game, probably the most boring of the entire weekend. We had SK Gaming taking on Team BDS. It's not really surprising that these two teams weren't all that entertaining to watch play League of Legends, but it is worth noting that it was not entertaining to watch this game. I know sometimes you guys tell me in the comment section that you'll go and watch games based on what I recommend because you don't get a chance to watch them all. This is one to skip, 1,000,000%. If you didn't watch it, congrats, you won. I think the only loser here was the fans. Both of these teams not really looking all that good, but BDS winning. Hooray! BDS won a game. That's got to feel pretty good for this organization that really freaking struggled to do this over the course of 2022. Obviously, they made some changes to the roster, but for the most part, they really did want to stick with some of their guys, especially their academy guys. Adam, Sheo, Crowny, all all members of this organization last year. It was really just Labrov coming in, and Labrov is the one I want to highlight in this game because he was the one making the flashy plays, making BDS look good. He's going to get my player of the game for BDS's first win in quite a long time. People were very down on Labrov after last year on Vitality, and I understand. Vitality really struggled, especially towards the back half of summer, and Carzzy and Labrov in particular were a pretty bad bot lane for pretty much the entirety of the year, but both players had shown that they were successful LEC players before that. Labrov in particular, I really liked as a player on Vitality back when it was him and Comp on that team. There was a lot to like about Labrov, and it's cool to see some of that coming back out here on BDS. It's kind of weird that Labrov kind of plays his best League on bad teams, but supports can sometimes do that, and he was making some mad life plays in this game on Thresh. Super impressive stuff from him. If he's going to play like this the entire year, BDS might be a lot better than people are giving them credit for. Him and Crownie actually pair up relatively nicely. Obviously, this is a bot lane that has played before on the aforementioned Vitality team, and they look to be clicking relatively early. Crownie did a really good job of managing his battle with Exakick. Obviously, buying Shield Bow this game on Caitlyn was super clutch. It saved him multiple times and really shocked Exakick. I just don't know if he wasn't pressing tab. I assume he gave up pressing tab some point through the game because he didn't want to look at his Nars build anymore. Shout out 2 Grievous Wounds items. Gotta love that. But he just didn't see it. Took some fights, and Crownie was able to kill him. So honestly, the BDS bot lane, impressing. I had decent expectations for them going into the year. I certainly didn't think they were going to be the biggest problem for this team, and I think it's coming true that they're actually kind of competent. They're a bot lane that can keep up, I think, with some people. But I also want to give a huge shout out to Sheo. Sheo was someone who I really wasn't all that into. Not that I was out of him, just I compared him to Schlatan. I think he was very similar as a prospect in terms of good jungler, not someone who's ever really going to break the game, just someone who's going to be able to facilitate. You can win with him, but you're probably not going to win because of him. He's been a little bit better than that in his first 2 games. Really like this game of Sejuani. He was facilitating a lot for Crownie in the bottom lane, and then also just setting Nuke up super well on this Akali. It was very difficult for Akali to be able to get in on this comp. You're looking at things like the Kindred, like the Gnar, like the Sylas, a ton of disengage. Even the Varus can disengage with ultimate and obviously with Karma shielding. And so, not really a ton of, like, super immediately burstable targets for the Akali, but Sejuani can help set up a ton, make sure that Akali can get in and stay in on a lot of these targets, and, you know, the ultimates won't really matter as much if Akali has more than 5 seconds to be able to burst you down. And so, Sheo did a really good job of being able to, I think, set up a lot of the kills and a lot of the pressure for BDS in this game in general. Obviously, we could talk a bit about the Baron flip. We talked about BDS flipping Baron earlier in the week against Koi. They now are on the recipient of a Baron flip on the side of SK, who just, I mean, what are you doing flipping Baron at an even game state? That is a ludicrously bad decision, and unfortunately, it pays off for BDS, and they're able to win the game from that. But on SK's side, another miserable game, quite frankly. Like, I just really don't have much else to say. They look awful. Their macro sense is just terrible. Like, they have no idea where or when to be anywhere. They're not checking tab, like I said, with Exakick to see what the enemy is building. Irrelevance building 2 Grievous Wounds items. Like, I feel like I'm in a parallel dimension where SK has just completely forgotten how to play the game. Marcoon's gonna get done of the game again here because, again, a lot of the pressure in the early game was completely forfeited by this Kindred pick, where the Sejuani was just able to be super proactive on the map, and the Kindred had to play a lot safer because she didn't have any pushing lanes because they're SK gaming, and so that was problematic. But even outside of that, I mean, obviously you go for that Baron flip because you know you have the Kindred ult, and you're hoping to be able to press that and then try to smite right out of it, but Sheo just ults Marcoon, and he just dies right next to Baron and loses Baron. Like, there is no explanation for why any of these plays were made. Marcoon looks awful. I think this is the worst he has ever looked at an LEC level. I mean, he looked up and down in his first half of a split on Excel, but, like, man, it was just never like this. Like, this is, like, the worst week he has had as a pro by a large margin. Exakick was really bad in this game. Doss does nothing in this game. Like, his scoreline looks fine. He only died once, but that's because he's nowhere on the map. He's not really trying to play the game. SK just looks completely lost. I didn't really see hardly any positives from the team in this game, and that's definitely concerning. When you look at the outlook of these two teams, SK could very easily end up in the bottom 2 right now, the way they are looking. BDS very much looks like the better team, and obviously, all you have to do is not be bottom 2. BDS doing a really good job. They held tough with Koi for a while. Obviously, weren't able to make it in the end, but they held tough, and then were able to come out here and beat an SK gaming team. So maybe BDS is closer to somewhere around 7 or 8 than they are 9 or 10, and maybe that's the opposite for SK. I think both of these teams are going to be feeling this game. BDS in a good way, and SK very much in a bad way. Moving on to game 2 here of day 2. It's another pretty interesting one, this time between another team that's really trying to fight out of those relegation spots and a team that really wants to prove that it can contend at the top level. We've got Astralis taking on Mad Lions. And Mad is able to pick up the victory. This should be a surprise to no one. Mad is the better team, and they proved it here by a lot. I don't know what to tell you about this draft from the side of Astralis, but it is bold. I will give you that. I would say, you know, when you see an Akali on the other side, maybe don't draft Viego Bard and then have Syndra EB or only Peel. That's a little bit of a problem, and guess what? That became a bit of a problem as this game went on, because Spoiler alert, no Peel Akali became a problem. Niski was super awesome this game. I have really nothing else to say. Niski is really, really good at the game of League of Legends. It's almost like he's underrated at this point, even though he won MVP last year. I underrate him. I had him as the number 5 mid laner heading into the year. Like I said in that video, though, 2 to 6 are all basically the same player in my eyes. They're all number 2. They're all tied for number 2. Niski's definitely in that group, but he has continued his super hot form in actually a little bit of a different way than how he played a lot of last year, where last year, obviously, he was the shove and roam facilitator type, really getting players like Elyoya and Unforgiven super far ahead so that they could take over the game in the later half. Now he's like, no, I want the resources. I want to carry. Victor in game number 1, he looked really good in those late game team fights, doing a ton of damage. Akali in game number 2, he was blowing up everybody on the backline. Dior had absolutely no chance. Got destroyed in lane, got destroyed out of lane. It was brutal. It was really, really brutal in the mid lane here. Niski looks phenomenal. I think you could argue that he looks even better than he did last year when he won MVP, and that is a very good sign for a Mad Lions team that is really, really, really looking to contend this year. Want to give another shout out to Karzi and Hillisang. They continue to look really solid, obviously, against a more, I would say, experienced bottom lane here in game number 2 with Kabe and Jonghoon, 2 players that I think played together really well last year. Ezreal Bard, not exactly the lane I would want to play into Varus Thresh, but you got to give credit where credit's due. Hillisang was phenomenal in this game on the Thresh, creating opportunities, making sure Karzi was safe, and Karzi was following up with everything, doing a lot of damage on that Varus. That pick can be a little hit or miss, but Karzi made it hit. And then you've got the top side. It still looked pretty good. Chasey did a really good job, especially with his flanks later in the game. That final flank that really caused Finn to have to go over and contest him basically ended the game for Mad Lions and Astralis here. Really, really good positioning from him. And then Elyoya just facilitated everything on the Sejuani. I would not usually be looking at this jungle mid duo as a Niski-led jungle mid duo between him and Elyoya, but that's kind of what it's been through the first 2 games, and both men have made it work, like, really, really, really well. Elyoya's been a very, very good facilitator for Niski, and Niski's done a great job with the resources being able to compound that. And so, big credit to Mad Lions. They're not playing in the way I expected. They're playing, honestly, even better. And then for Astralis, another rough game here. You dropped to 0-2. Dior, I said this in the first series that they played this year, he might just be the worst player in the LEC. He just is not able to compete at this level with basically anybody. I had him above Nuke in my mid lane rankings. That looks to be problematic. I know Nuke's not great. Like, I'm not changing my opinion on Nuke, but God, Dior just gets bodied by everyone. He was doing that last year. It's happening again this year. All the upside that we saw from him on Fnatic Rising, you know, a couple of years ago, back in 2020, the second half of 2021, I should say, because that's really the only time he played pro, it's all gone. Like he's just not that player anymore. I think he needs to leave the LEC. I really don't think that he's ever going to get his confidence back if he continues to have to play against some of the best mid laners in the entire world on a week-to-week basis. I think he needs to, you know, kind of take his time on a lower team, build his way back up, and then maybe he can get back to this point. It just does not feel like he is there right now. 113 also continues to be a problem. He feels like a Viego one-trick, which was a problem that I had with him in my power rankings video when I was reviewing his tape. It felt like on Viego he was so much better than on every other champ, and that's kind of come through here in the LEC. He really only feels comfortable picking Viego. That's kind of the impression that I get because he picked Viego with this freaking comp, and if you pick Viego here, you're probably going to pick him anywhere. He didn't play all that well. He presses the emote key 7,000 times a game. I mean, what else can I say about 113? He is exactly who we thought he was going to be, someone who is just overmatched at this level. And when your jungle and your mid laner both look like players that are, in fact, completely overmatched at this level, it's going to be very difficult to win games, especially when you're going up against a duo like Elyoya and Niski. Kabe and Jonghoon didn't play all that well. I hate the Bard pick in this matchup. And then Finn, you know, for his credit, played okay up until, like, the final team fights of the game where he was just severely out of position, chasing Chasey, pun not intended, but it's kind of funny, chasing him around, like, all fight long and then not peeling for anybody else on his team. Like, this entire team just feels completely disjointed. They don't feel like they're together, and it's a problem. I'm really not sure exactly where this team goes from here. Them and SK feel so clearly like the bottom 2 teams in the league right now. If they don't figure out their jungle mid situation, it really doesn't matter how well bot lane plays. They're probably not going to win a lot of games, and when you look at how they played today, bot lane didn't even play all that well, and so that's concerning. That's definitely going to be a problem for Astralis. As for Mad Lions, another killer start to a year. They always do this. Elyoya and Niski are on the same page. As per usual, they've kicked off hot, and Karzi and Hillisang look like a terrifyingly good bot lane duo. If they can keep this up, they are going to be one of those teams that is contesting for top 4. Obviously, it's super wide open in the LEC right now. A lot of teams have really shown a lot of promise, but you got to give credit where credit is due. Mad Lions looks very, very, very scary. Moving on to our third game here of day number 2. We had a fun matchup. Two teams that really did kind of retool in the offseason, if you will. One brand new to the league and the other just adding a lot of really key pieces around their star. We had Team Vitality taking on Team Heretics here. Battle of the 1-0s. Vitality is able to pick up the important win here, though. They moved to 2-0, and they are looking about as good as you can possibly look at the start of this season. I mean, holy crap, is this team just firing on all cylinders. They're so aggressive. They're so talented. They're really just able to make so much work. But I have to say this. What the hell is going on in draft? I'm not the draft guy. I talk about this all the time on the channel. You can beat a bad draft. Like if you are the better team and you draft poorly, you are still probably going to be able to win that game. That is just how it goes. The better team in league matters more than the better draft, typically speaking. But when you handicap yourself like this so hard, it is very difficult to win the game. You're looking at Jax, Sejuani, Braum, 4 melees, and a Kalista. Like, what is going on? How are you ever supposed to win this game? You last pick Kassadin into Azir. What are you supposed to be winning this game with? I just don't understand the thought process behind this draft at all. They actually played it out relatively well, which we'll get to, but man, was it just disaster basically from the start for Heretics, in my opinion. For Vitality, though, they basically did everything they needed to do. You had a super big comp advantage, and so what do? You play towards your late game win condition, which in this case was the Azir, was Perks. He's going to get my player of the game. He was fantastic. I know a lot of people criticize his Azir in the same way that people criticize his Ryze, because sometimes in the late game, he'll just make one really bad decision, because that's what Perks does, and he'll have to come back from that. But his Azir this game was fantastic. He brutalized Ruby in lane. There was really nothing that Kassadin could do, nor should there have been. Azir should be able to punish Kassadin incredibly hard. He had a ton of assistance from Bo in the jungle, who did a great job of being able to set him up, and those two are really working together incredibly well, by the way. I just think Perks is on that path right now where in a couple of weeks we're going to be reminded that he is one of the best mid laners in the West and one of the best players the LEC has ever had. I was already on that train going into the year. I think a lot of people are probably going to be jumping onto that as we move throughout the first couple of weeks, because he was great here on the Azir, and I don't expect that to change. Like I said, Bo was also fantastic. Honestly, just out-jungled Yankos. Like, that's a pretty big accomplishment to have. Bo is just a psychopath. He's going to take a fight anywhere, anytime, and with this comp, that actually works out super well. The Jax loves to skirmish. The Zeri and the Braum are going to love to skirmish. There's a lot of pieces on this team that really do want to be able to get ahead, and then once they had the gold lead, it was over, because, I mean, again, look at the comp. How do you ever play this from a deficit? And so, overall, you know, like, great from this jungle mid duo. They are going to be one of the best in the league. Like, end of story. There is no they could be. They are going to be one of, if not the best in the league. They proved that in this game and in the first one too. Photon continues to be awesome, although big credit to Evie. I thought he played fantastic on the K'Sante. There's just only so much that he can do on K'Sante to try and win this game, but Photon played well on the Jax as well. And then big credit to Neon. Really good game here. I thought his game one was a little lackluster for Vitality. Obviously, a lot of the shine was on top side. They were playing up there a lot, and that's what I expect Vitality to do a lot of the year. But Neon got a lot more resources this game on the Zeri, and he really made the most of it. This was much better from him. Vitality really looks like a complete roster. Kaiser was awesome on the Braum, basically being everywhere he needs to. This Vitality team looks great. As for Heretics, again, draft sucks. Last pick Kassadin was completely and utterly useless. Ruby is going to get my dud of the game after getting player of the game in game number 1. He's an incredibly talented player, but there's only so much you can overcome. He was completely bullied out of lane, was never able to make it to any of these skirmishes that Bo was initiating in the river, and then was never able to hit that late game. The Kassadin looks exploitable at a pro level. Obviously, Kassadin can become Kassa-Win if you get to that point, but teams are smart enough to know that they can attack early, that they can play something like a Sejuani, and they can really move the tempo forward. I mean, you're looking at a Azir, Zeri, Jax really even as like a trio, and you're like, okay, well, they want to play for late game. Kassadin seems pretty good, but the problem with that is you don't have to play these champions for late game. Bo is going to play super aggressive on the Sedge. He's going to try and force fights, and what are you actually going to match with? Evie was really the only player on the team that was trying to match in terms of aggression and in terms of pressure to keep the game close. Everybody else felt like they were rolling over and dying, even Yankos here on the Wukong, who I expected a lot more out of. I really need to see some killer instinct out of Heretics. It just felt like they didn't really have that in this game, but like I said, they put themselves so far behind early on that there was not much they could do. Also, no Kalista. It's 2023. No Kalista. No thank you. I don't want it. Kalista and Astralis, I just don't think it's all that good right now. I get it. There were like 45 ADC bans in this draft, but no Kalista, no thank you, it's not good. Anyways, outlooks for these two teams, Heretics is probably where we think they are. They're probably just outside the top 6 for me. I think top 6 is really starting to solidify itself. All 6 of the teams at the top feel very strong. That's what we thought they were going to be going into the year. I think Heretics might just be right on the outside of that. But they're not a bad team by any stretch of the imagination. I do think that they are a level above, you know, your BDS, your Astralis, your SKs, right? Like, they're not near the bottom of the league. I just struggle to find ways that this kind of team is going to consistently be able to beat some of the better teams in the entire league. Hopefully they can get some levels up from players like Ruby, who played really well, and Jack Spectra, who can come into their own. And hopefully Evie continues to play this aggressive. Really liked him in this game. But for Vitality, I mean, really everything is clicking. This is about as perfect a dream of a start to the season as you could ask for. Bo looks great, Photon looks great, Perks looks great, Neon had a really good game, Kaiser looks great. Like, there's really not a lot of weaknesses, and if they keep this up, like I said earlier, they could genuinely just be the best team in Europe. Moving on to Game 4 here of Day 2, we had another interesting one, and this was my most excited and most interesting game of Day 2. At least to me, we had Excel taking on Koi. Definitely two teams that I was really excited to see play each other. Excel really not showing up the day before. Koi definitely having a good performance, but still, two teams that I was really hoping to see more out of in an early start to the season. And Koi is able to pick up a really big win here, and that's really big for Koi because they did it in a way that made me feel a lot more comfortable. This was 2022 Koi, or at least it was a lot more similar to 2022 Koi. First of all, I know what I said in the last segment. I gotta retract it a little bit. Kalista, most teams, 9 out of the 10 teams in the LEC probably shouldn't be picking Kalista. Comp can do whatever he wants. Comp can pick Kalista. He is the best Kalista I've watched in a very long time. It's clearly a signature pick. We've known that for a while. We definitely saw it a lot last year. Don't take anything I have to say about Kalista to mean that it's Comp's Kalista. Comp's Kalista is a different animal. When I say don't pick Kalista in 2023, Comp can pick Kalista in 2023, and he can get player of the game for it, because man, was he freaking good in this one. Obviously, him and Trimby are just so in sync at all times. I really do think that their playstyles meshing together so well have helped both of them really unlock their best potential. Comp is someone who really wants to be playing as the focal point in a team. That was kind of the big problem I think he had in Vitality. Going back and rewatching some of those games this offseason, was he was playing weak side a lot on that Vitality team and really wasn't given the amount of resources that I think he would have wanted, but he was the main focus here last year on Rogue in terms of resources and in terms of where they wanted to go on the map. And Trimby, for his credit, not really a roamer, not really somebody who wants to get on the map, not really somebody who wants to play the Amumu or the Leona or the Alistair. He's good at those champions, but his specialty is this laning 2v2 that him and Comp have really developed into something that is incredibly lethal, and they dominated this game on it. Even if I do like how Patrick and Targamas played, especially towards the mid part of the game, there's just nothing else to say other than the fact that Comp and Trimby are too good. They're the best bot lane in Europe, and it really isn't all that close right now. Big credit to Larson as well. This is the first Kassadin that I've seen in the LEC actually do something, so big credit to Larson. He got to the point in the game where he hit level 11, and then he could do a lot of damage. Very good. That's what you're supposed to do on that champion. And then Zagenda continues to show some good things, even if he was a little bit outplayed by Odoamne on the other side, who, again, played fantastic. I can't stress this enough. First couple games of the season, Odo feels very, very hard stuck on this Excel team, but credit to Koi. They looked really, really solid here. When Malrang is your least impactful player on the Maokai, that is a very good sign because everybody else on the team really did step up and have a very solid game here. For Excel, on the other hand, I'm starting to get worried, and it's not because of the player's skill, because player skill bounces back, right? Some players can just have a couple bad games. Like, it happens, sometimes you're going to have an 0-2 week or an 0-3 week or whatever, and you can bounce back. Obviously, in single round robin, that's not ideal, but you're playing against G2, you're playing against Koi, the two finalists from last year in the LEC. You're not losing your mind losing both of those games. What worries me is the way that they are losing, which is just the most passive, boring, reserved, scared, that's the word I want to use, scared play that I have seen an LEC team play with in a long time, and it's very concerning. This is a problem that I think Xerxes has struggled with a lot in his career as the jungler, is that his teams do tend to operate quite slowly. That was a problem with Astralis last year in some of their losses. That was definitely a problem with Immortals when he was in North America, and then obviously going back to the Splice days, those teams were notoriously very slow as well, and so I'm just worried about this Excel team and how they're going to be able to make this work, because Odo's playing well in the top lane. He's winning these top lane matchups. He's trying to translate leads that he's able to create on some of these early game champions. Patrick and Targamas, while not perfect, are creating opportunities. He's doing damage on the Lucian. The problem is just the fact that they are not taking fights, they're not pushing anything, they're not trying to get any advantages. They're just hoping the game comes to them, and against these really good teams, it's just not going to. And so that's very concerning. Xerxes is my easy choice for dud of the game here, because again, he just continues to be a non-factor. I don't like the Vi pick, I've talked about it so much, it continues to lose, it's got like a 25% win rate globally, but we're still picking it. But it's more than that. It's more than just the fact that, oh, he didn't have a good game on Vi, because his game on Vi was fine, it was whatever, right? The mechanics of the plays that he actually did make, they weren't awful plays. It's just the inability to pull the trigger, and I'm not just going to put that all on Xerxes, right? Because it's not entirely his fault. You want to see more from VTO, who has not started out the year well. A game of Ahri here, a champion that he is really good at, was just super mediocre at best, and that's concerning. Pretty much everybody except for Odo on this team makes me worry that Excel is just not in a position to want to try and win games. Hopefully they can figure something out. They've got a much easier game later on in the week that we will talk about. Hopefully they can pick up a win there, but it's a pretty disastrous start to the season, in my opinion, for an Excel team that really needed to see some growth pretty early on. But for Koi, really, really good game. This is 2022. This is playthrough comp. Make sure he gets ahead. Larsen's going to be good in late game team fights, and you've got a really stable top side. If this continues, again, this is Koi. Like, this is what they do. They play really consistent throughout the regular season, and they hope to peak later in the playoffs. And if they can do that again, they might be on track for another year of contending for an LEC title. That brings us to our final game here of day 2. Of course, now with Super Weeks every single week in the LEC, we're going to have 3 days all year long, or at least until the format changes in a couple of weeks here. And so our final game of day 2 here is a matchup between two of the most prestigious organizations in Europe, the Classic, Fnatic versus G2. And I don't think surprising a lot of people, we have G2 coming out on top in this one. They continue to look really good. They draft a ridiculously aggressive comp. Hansama gets his signature Draven pick here back in Europe, and man, does he make it count. This game was over, and it was over fast. It's pretty insane how quickly G2 was able to take a lead that they generated and just end the game, although it shouldn't be too shocking with Hansama, of course, on the Draven, like I said, and just in general, Draven getting ahead, it can be a huge problem, but we gotta talk about it. Fnatic initiates a 3v3 fight in the bot lane at level 3. They lose 3-0, and the game is over. Draven gets 2 kills. Nautilus picks up the other one. Both of Hans and Mickey, I would say, play relatively perfectly for the rest of this game. Obviously, I wouldn't say completely perfectly. Still some mistakes. Hans gets caught a little bit later, and Broken Blade certainly is in some places he shouldn't be. But for the most part, G2 is just able to generate that lead onto the Draven and end the game, basically just directly through him. Pretty easy call for player of the game. It's going to be Hansama on the Draven. You can't give him this signature pick, and you most especially can't give him his signature pick and then feed him 2 kills in the first 3 minutes of the game. It is absolutely disastrous. Fnatic was never really in this. They never really had a shot, and most of that was that one awful decision in the bottom half of the map. But credit to Hans, credit to Mickey, and credit to Yike for being able to capitalize on a play that they figured Razork clearly was going to be able to make. Obviously, them over-aggressing Fnatic, that is, staying much longer than they needed to, ended up netting them a lot more kills than maybe they were supposed to be able to get. But Yike, Mickey had to be in the right spots to be able to make those plays. Mickey's hooks on Nautilus this game were absolutely phenomenal. He ended the game deathless on Nautilus, which is just absolutely absurd. A huge testament to how well he played in this game and how well he has started the season. And then, of course, Yike on the Viego. I actually think he had another really stellar game. Obviously, had a great start and then had pretty much perma pressure from then on because Razork had no shot of contesting the Viego once the Draven was able to get ahead. They had full bot side control. They could take dragons. They could take heralds. They could take basically anything they wanted so long as they coordinated to get it. Obviously, Broken Blade was on weak side a bit this game and was taken advantage of at points in time, but for the most part, Yike was able to control every single part of this map, and he continues to impress me, not only with his ability to continuously get himself ahead on champion like Viego, but for his ability to control the map when he is ahead. That's something that some young junglers can struggle with. They can generate their own leads, but they can do a little bit of a poor job doing something with those leads and making sure the enemy team doesn't really have footholds to get themselves back into the game. I think Yike did that really well here. Caps was kind of along for the ride on Kali. That's a pretty good sentence to hear if you're G2. That's not the first time that you've heard that this week. Caps is here, and he's kind of allowed to get carried by these young, or I should say rebounding threats here on G2, whether it be the rookie Yike, whether it be Hans in the bot lane, whether it be Mickey, right? If he's the one getting carried, that's a pretty good team, and that's a pretty good setup that you have created for yourself. This team looks very scary, and they're playing at a high level right now. As for Fnatic, this is disaster zone. Obviously, they could have played this game relatively well. Maybe, if you get past that level 3, you start to look at the game a little bit more favorably, but really, at that point, it didn't matter. The game was over. G2 had to throw the game in order for Fnatic to have any shot of winning, and expecting the best team in the league to throw the game is just not a great strategy for winning. Once that level 3 dive went completely sideways bot lane, the game was over, and for that, I'm going to give Razork my dud of the game. That's the second time this week he's gotten that. I'm not going to blame it entirely on him that his team completely ran it down. It looks like Reckless was playing that way too aggressive. I'm not going to say it was entirely his fault or anything like that, or that he was the one making the call to fight there, but just generally as a team, that play was disastrous, and then Razork continuously lost pressure after pressure after pressure point on the map and really had no impact on the game. Humanoid was completely shut out of the mid lane matchup because of the worry of Viego potentially being there. Wonder was doing absolutely nothing on the Cassante because truly, what are you going to do in a matchup like this when the rest of your team is losing so much? And then Razork, to complete the triumvirate, just had zero, literally negative pressure on the Sejuani. 1-6-3, I think, sums it up relatively well. This jungler just has to be better. I was going to say this jungle mid duo. Humanoid, I don't blame this loss on him. He was just put in a bad spot, but Razork has to be better. There really is no other way to say it. He wasn't that good in their first game of the year. I think it was even worse in their second game of the year, and that's really going to be a question mark. Razork was a little bit of a problem for them in the regular season last year, not nearly as much as a player like Humanoid, but remember the conversation, at least on my channel, surrounding Fnatic in the summer split was, this was a team that Upset needed to win games for, and then Wonder needed to support in team fights. Without that, they didn't really have a lot of win conditions, because Razork and Humanoid really weren't performing. If you're getting back to that, this Fnatic team is nowhere near top 4, and they're definitely going to need to have some improvements in order to get there. But as we know, this team has the talent to be able to get to that zone. They just need to be able to show it on a consistent basis, and a lot of that is going to come through Razork, hopefully leveling up. But for G2, about as good as you can ask for. I mean, really, what more could you ask for than a level 3 Draven double kill and just snowballing the game out of control? Your rookie jungler looks great. Your bot lane that had question marks looks great. The two most confident players on the team, or the players I was the most confident in Broken Blade and Caps. Broken Blade's had some moments, but Caps looks like he's along for the ride, and, eventually he's going to show up and be great. This G2 team is very likely just simply the best team in Europe by a large margin right now, and that's a lot of fun to watch. I really am looking forward to the exponential growth that this organization and this team will make as the year continues on. That's going to finally bring us to the start of our third and final day here in week 1 of the LEC Winter Split. And we kicked off the third and final day with an interesting matchup between SK Gaming and Team Heretics. Heretics looking a lot better through the first 2 days. SK looking very lost in their 0-2 start. But it's actually SK that's going to be walking away from day 3 with a win. A huge turnaround from a team that had really struggled to get basically anything going through the first couple of games. And so you got to feel really excited for SK. They would have looked very doomed had they not picked up this super important win. But tough on Heretics, man. Their strengths and their weaknesses are really starting to expose themselves. I think we're starting to get a good idea of what Heretics is looking like as a team, and unfortunately, it may not be the exact look that they thought they were going to get going into the season. So let's go ahead and talk about it, of course, starting with SK Gaming. I like this a lot as a bounce back. I think this draft is really easy to execute. You have a little bit more agency on the top side. With the Camille, you're able to play for that a bit more, but Silas, Zeri, Renata, a lot of tools here to be able to create plays around the map. This ideally will lead you to not just waiting or making wrong plays, usually skirmishes, and teams that skirmish too much, like SK was doing in their previous few games, should just draft skirmish comps. Like that, it is straightforward, really, when you think about it. Play to your team's strengths, and I think that's what this does. You have Sejuani Silas, which is a really strong mid-jungle duo for mid-game skirmishes. You have Zeri, which can scale into the late game, but really would appreciate having some of these fights break out in the middle of the game, especially if you feel like Exakick can outperform Jack Spectra, which we'll get to. He absolutely did. And then Irrelevant on the top side has a lot more counterplay than he typically does when he plays a lot of the tanks that he got used to on Misfits. But overall, really good win for SK. Very impressed with the bot lane in particular. Exakick is going to get my player of the game here on the Zeri. He was so much better than Jack Spectra in this game by pretty much every margin. He was dominating him in the lane phase as Zeri into Varus, not something that I would typically say, but he also did a fantastic job of positioning in a lot of these team fights to create advantages for them later in the game. Obviously was able to clean up a lot once Heretics was making some mistakes towards the end of the game. The Hexgate play obviously comes to mind, but Exakick and DOS honestly both did a really good job in this game to be able to drag SK to a win. I don't think anybody on SK was bad per se, but Exakick and DOS definitely were the standout members in my opinion. Marcoon had a very good bounce back game. He wasn't perfect, but he was better than Yankos, and I think that is a good sign to have, right? Where he was creating a lot of opportunities, making sure that his Zeri had opportunities to win him the game. He's Sejuani. He just needs to make sure that somebody on the team can win. It doesn't have to be him. Overall, good game from SK. A lot of the problems that I had in the first couple games were shown to be able to be fixed in this experience here. Now, obviously, we need to see it be more consistent and against teams that are maybe a little bit more consistent than Heretics, but as it stands right now, happy with how SK was able to win this game. As for Heretics, this is starting to become a pattern. I know we're only 1 week into the season, but remember, that's a third of the first half, like the first split of the season, and so that's a little bit of a problem, right? You've got Jack, Spectra, and Mercer really not coming together in the bot lane. They are becoming a little bit of an issue. Jack's actually going to get my dud of the game here. He was someone who I was really excited about coming into the LEC, and I really did like Mercer last year. I thought he was a very underrated player on that Misfits team. You see a lot of hate for players like Mercer and players like Irrelevant with how they have played early on in the season here, but I think a lot of that is recency bias. Going back and watching Misfits last year, those two players both performed way above their expectations levels and both definitely deserved spots in the LEC going into this year, but Jack and Mercer do not have any sort of chemistry in the bot lane. That did show a little bit through in their first couple games, but man, it was abused in this one by Exakick and by DOS. They were just not on the same level. Jack in particular was just out of position a lot. He wasn't auto-attacking. He was playing so safe and so careful up until the point where Evie just kind of threw the game away, but you know, let's talk about Evie while we can. He was fantastic through the first 15 to 20 minutes of this game. On the Cassante, he plays so aggressive. He creates his own advantages. Really, he was better than Irrelevant in this game, even though I think Irrelevant also was relatively good. The problem was just that Evie plays a little bit too fast. Sometimes the Hex Gates, you live by the Hex Gates, you die by the Hex Gates. Sometimes you just take a Hex Gate right into Fog and then lose the game because your entire team dies. That just kind of is what it is sometimes, but Evie still is definitely the big focal point of this Heretics team and by far the most consistent and probably the most aggressive and best player that Heretics has. I would expect them to continue to play to him. Maybe less Cassante, maybe more of a flip matchup here. Maybe you want to give the opponent something like Cassante so that you can pick up the Camille or that you can pick up the Jax. Something like that I think would really play to Heretics' strengths. And I expect them to go in that direction. Yankos has been okay, certainly not a superstar, but he's never really been the kind to create his own advantages by himself if the rest of his team is losing, especially if his mid lane is getting pushed in like it did in this game. Ruby had a great game to open the season on the Cass, has really not had a good game outside of that. Games 2 and 3 were pretty bad for Ruby. There's a lot of question marks that this Heretics team has to answer, but the biggest one absolutely has to be that bot lane. If they can't corral them in, this is not going to be a top 6 team. Like, they're really not even going to be in the conversation. I'm not going to say that they're going to be in danger of falling out of the top 8. However, obviously, if the bot lane continues to lose games against teams like SK that they really should and need to be beating to make sure that they stay comfortable there, that's going to be a little bit of a problem. And so, obviously, you need to see that bot lane get back on the right track, but Evie is showing some good things. Ruby had a good game in the LEC this week. It just needs to be more consistent over the course of a whole game. And then for SK, you got to be super thankful they showed this. If they didn't, they would pretty easily be number 10 in my power rankings, quite frankly, because they had a horrendous first 2 games. For them to bounce back and pick up a really crucial and important win over Heretics here does kind of keep their season alive. Not that it would just be dead in the water if they weren't able to win this. It would just be on life support, at the very least. They would be in a tough spot having to come back from 0-3, but luckily Exakick and DOS were able to perform here. 2 players that you're really hoping can step up and kind of carry this SK team. Hopefully you get better performances out of your top side of the map and you can kind of carry this momentum into your future games rather than everything else you did here in week 1. Now we get to jump into our second game here of the final day of week 1, and I'm not really that excited to talk about this one. It was an absolute fever dream to watch. I can't even begin to tell you what was going on inside the minds of both of these teams, but what I can tell you is that it was kind of fun to watch. We had a matchup between Excel and Team BDS, and Excel is able to pick up the win, absolutely miraculously. Excel does not go winless this week. due in no fault to their own play. Like, they certainly played to lose this game, but BDS played to lose it just a tad bit harder. This goes 46 minutes, and there is 0 macro, and I feel so bad for Crowny. We'll get into it in a bit. I actually, you know what, we'll get into it now. I'm doing this for the first time in the history of my channel, in the history of these weekly recaps, these SuperKmanrocks weekly recaps, whatever, you know, series you want to call them, in any region. I'm giving player of the game to the losing team, because no one on Excel was player of the game. Crowny was so much better than everyone else who was in this game. Maybe Lebrov was also pretty good. BDS's bot lane was so much better than anyone else who was in this game, and it was not close. I feel so bad for Crowny and Lebrov that they ended up losing this game. They've actually looked pretty good, but I just couldn't reasonably give it to someone on Excel. If I did have to give it to someone on Excel, it's probably VTO on the Twisted Fate of all things. First of all, what the hell are you doing? Why are you playing Twisted Fate? It's 2023. We just had this conversation about Kalista. You're not comp on Kalista. You're VTO on Twisted Fate. Don't play TF. And why, pray tell, are you picking Varus with Twisted Fate? This is such a low damage comp. You're relying so much on Jax to be able to get in and actually do anything. You have a little bit of appeal with Maokai, but what exactly are you supposed to do if Darius starts getting resets? Like, how are you supposed to kill him fast enough? Are you just gonna chain CC him and hope he dies? Like, what is the point of this draft? I just don't understand. So, shout out VTO. I thought he was playing the best. He was really the only one towards the back half of this game that was playing aggressively in any manner. Everyone else on this team, including Otoamne, who I have praised in the past, was playing super safe, super passive, was playing to lose. I don't understand what the shot calling on this team is. There is none. They are just kind of sitting there waiting for shit to happen, and BDS honestly was in a pretty good spot to be able to take advantage of it. Crowny was doing a ton of damage on this Caitlyn, being set up really well by Lebrov on the Lux. There was no capitalizing from Adam and Sheo. They were doing basically nothing the entire game, and all of this leads to the point where BDS just sacks Elder Dragon. Like, what is going on? Is anybody watching this game? Like, am I having a stroke? Is this my nightmare? Like, I don't understand what's happening. Sheo is gonna get my dud of the game here on the side of BDS because he gives up Elder Dragon. He doesn't even try to contest it. Like, they don't even go to it. They just give it for free. And then he full initiates a fight at Sejuani. He all-ins when Excel has Elder. What is happening? Like, I can't. It's so insane. This game almost doesn't feel real. It's hard to analyze this, you know what I mean? Like, my job here is to sit here and tell you what I think teams did right and what I think teams did wrong. I don't know how to analyze this. This was not a game between two professional League of Legends teams. This felt like a game in Gold 3. Like, I don't know what to tell you. VTO was playing super aggro on the TF, was sometimes in, you know, setting up good plays, but he had no damage to follow it up on because you've got Varus, you've got Maokai. You're just hoping the Jax can blow somebody up, but it's not like you can really do all that much into a Sejuani who's just going to perma-CC you as Jax. And so, you don't really have any damage. You're never going to kill anybody on the side of Excel. But on the side of BDS, you really have no way to concretely win fights because they're incredibly slippery. You look at Jax, it's hard to kill him. Maokai's going to be able to peel. TF has gold card. Varus has ult. Karma has shields for everybody in the lineup. Where exactly are your kills going to come in? Nuke's not going to get them on the Akali. He got some at the back of team fights, but he's not going to be able to reasonably blow people up. Caitlyn is a low damage AD carry, especially towards the back half of the game. Darius needs resets in order to actually play. Like, where exactly is the damage in this game? I'm now seeing why it went 46 freaking minutes. Like, oh, I just hate both drafts. I hate both the way they played. Like, I don't even really want to analyze it. Crowny's my player of the game because him and Lebrov are the only good players. Sheo's my dud of the game. What does this mean for both teams? Well, Excel better get their shit together. Obviously, putting them at number 1 was a mistake. Now, on paper, they still have the talent to be, like, a top team, right? And I don't know how much I'm going to punish them for having a really bad week, but this team sucks right now. They have no cohesion. It's not the talent. They're able to keep up in terms of talent level. Like, these games are not, like, big blowouts. They're not getting, you know, 3v3 killed in skirmishes, and they're not able to keep up with BDS or whatever, right? They're just not making any plays. They're playing so slow. They're playing so safe. If they don't fix that, they are just going to be one of these teams that slowly fades into complete irrelevancy. They have to fix it, and they have to fix it now. As for BDS, honestly, all things considered, week 1 was a success. I know you're sitting at 1 and 2, and that's probably not where you want to be, but this is a team that held their own against Koi, which is not expected. Then they go on to surprise everyone and take a win off of SK Gaming, not expected, and then they were just straight up the better team in their game against Excel. Honestly, takeaways for BDS, they're probably better than I gave them credit for, and this should be a team that if they continue on their current pace, shouldn't drop out in the bottom two. They are playing better than teams like SK. They are playing definitely better than a team like Astralis, potentially even better than a team like Heretics, or at least more complete than a team like Heretics right now, but they run into similar issues where it's just like one side of the map is a huge problem. For Heretics, it's the bot lane. For BDS, it's this jungle mid duo, which just continues to not really do all that much. Nuke's score looks pretty good in this game, but I promise you his impact was not nearly as good as his score line would make it out to be. And so BDS honestly looking good, certainly not looking like the 10th place team, and Excel not looking good, certainly not looking like the #1 ranked team. It looks like both of these teams are going to be moving somewhere in my power rankings by week's end. Moving on to our third game, though, of day number 3 here. We had a top versus bottom of the standings matchup, and it went just about as you'd expect, which is sometimes a surprise for the LEC. We had G2 Esports taking on Astralis, and G2 actually managed to win. I'm so used to whatever team is looking good and whatever team is looking awful playing each other, and then just having the awful team win. That's just so standard for the LEC that I would honestly consider this game an upset. That Astralis not just randomly winning a game off of G2 is an upset to me, but golly, do G2 just look unstoppable right now. They picked the goofiest comp I have ever seen. Karma top, Zac mid, not tank Zac mid. I kind of understand tank Zac mid, right? Like, you get a lot of roam pressure, you're able to help the Kindred, the engages are really solid. This is full AP Zac mid, and Caps goes nuclear. Like, he's just that much better than everyone he's playing against, that he goes full nuclear. He's got a support in the top lane here with the Karma. Mickey X is on the Ashe. He's missing literally every arrow he shoots the entire game. Like, this G2 team, it doesn't matter what they do. They just win right now. Caps is going to get the player of the game because I would be remiss to give it to literally anyone else. He played AP Zac in the mid lane and dominated on it at a pro level, like at the LEC level. I get he's going into Dior, who I've talked about in this video, potentially just being the worst player in the LEC. But come on, man. Caps looks so freaking good right now. Playing as the support early on in the season, I thought he was going to do that in this game. Nope, he is the carry. He's playing a lot with Yike. I think that's really been the most encouraging sign, I would say, from G2 so far. Yes, Hans and Mickey are looking good, but I kind of expected that. I really didn't think that either of them were going to struggle all that much coming back together here on a good org in G2, but the synergy that Yike and Caps have been able to create as a duo is incredibly impressive. Caps plays off of Yike incredibly well, where Yike is going to go in and try to make a lot of these plays, and Caps is going to make sure to be there to facilitate them. Sometimes he's going to be able to get away with it, sometimes obviously not, but it is just really impressive to see two players that really haven't been playing together all that long feel like they have such strong chemistry so early on. Caps did a great job of making sure Yike was able to get all of his marks this game, and, you know, credit to Yike. I think in a more normal world, Yike is your player of the game, right? I think Yike, generally speaking, played this game the best, or he was the most important member of the game, but it's just hard for me not to give it to the Zac mid, right? When Caps played so ridiculously well, he was doing so much damage, he was able to create so much pressure on the map. I do think both of them were impactful, but Yike, what a damn good opening weekend from Yike. I mean, this is about as good as it gets to start your LEC career off. He has dominated all 3 games. He has looked completely unstoppable no matter who he is playing against. Experienced jungler like Xerxes or brand new like 113. It really does not matter. He has been able to run circles around pretty much everybody. Even I, who was a Yike fan going into the year, could not have predicted that he was going to take to the LEC this quickly. Now, obviously, having a player like Caps on your team that is willing to play for you, that is willing to make sure that when you pick Kindred, you can go and get all your marks, and you're going to have your team there. You have a Karma top, for Christ's sake. Like, you have a lot of opportunities here. Obviously, the team is kind of built around him in a way that makes him feel comfortable, but he still has to execute. It's a lot of responsibility on his shoulders, and he has knocked it out of the park. He has been fantastic for G2, the first good Kindred that I have seen all weekend. And then for Astralis on the other side, it's weird to say this, but they probably looked about as good as you can look as a team getting absolutely dominated and destroyed in 25 minutes by AP Zac mid, right? Like, usually you would be like, oh, they got, you know, everybody on the team just played awful and it was a rollover and die kind of moment. They had moments where they looked good. Dior was actually creating some plays on the Silas, and Finn actually had some pretty exciting moments of being able to TP away from ganks, not once, but twice. So that's pretty cool, but for the most part, they just weren't on the same level. Like, this team is just not in the same stratosphere as G2 right now. 113 kind of personifies that, where him on Sejuani, you know, that's a champion that does kind of need to go in, is probably going to rack up a considerable amount of death numbers, but at that same time, man, was he just out of position a lot. And when he would take these skirmishes, he was dying instantly. He had zero map pressure. Yike was running circles around him. That was kind of the story of 113 at the start of the season, and I can't really say I'm surprised. That was one of the big takes that I did agree with, that I think most analysts had coming in from the LFL and from EU Masters, that 113 just wasn't ready to play in the LEC. Him and Dior look like a huge problem for this Astralis team. Probably the worst jungle mid duo, maybe in any major region in the world, like all 4 of the top major regions. I can't think of a worse jungle mid duo. Obviously, we haven't seen LCS play yet, but I mean, this is probably going to be the worst jungle mid duo in all 4 of the major regions, so hopefully they can figure that out. I'm not sure if it's going to necessitate changes, but starting the season 0-3 when you've only got 9 games to make sure you're not in the bottom 2 is not a good sign. Astralis has to change a lot. Kabe and Jonghoon aren't even really performing all that much this year. They had a good first game of the season, but ever since then, the rest of the team has kind of dragged them down. Finn is literally nothing in the top lane, and their jungle mid sucks. Right now, it is pretty clear that Astralis is the worst team in the league, and then on the flip side, G2 is the exact opposite. It is pretty clear to me that G2 is the best team in the league right now. They just can do whatever they want and dominate. Karma top, Zac mid, playing a Kindred and really facilitating that. Mickey can miss literally every arrow on Ashe and he can still win the game by a large margin. It really is just G2's world and we're living in it right now. I'm really excited to see how they're going to fare once they start going up against some of the actually incredibly tough teams. Obviously, no shade to Excel and Fnatic, but they're probably the weakest of like the big 6 in the LEC right now by a pretty considerable margin. And so when we start to see those matchups against Koi, when we start to see those matchups against Vitality, I'm really going to be interested to see how G2 adapts to those. But for now, I mean, could you possibly ask for a better opening start to the year for G2? Moving on to game 4 now of day 3 in the LEC. We had an interesting one. 2 teams that I actually just kind of talked about in relation to G2 facing off against each other. We had Fnatic taking on Koi. And Fnatic picks up the win here, a huge win that they desperately needed. I was very worried going into this final day that Fnatic's week 1 was going to look like an 0-3, and that was going to be not a good look for a Fnatic team that was really desperately in need of some kind of win. But you know what? They weathered the storm, and they were able to come back here. Koi actually had a really good early game. They jumped out to a great start off of the back of just abusing Wunder in the top lane. That's what Malrang does, right? He goes top and he gets kills. Wunder was dead over and over again on this Gragas, his signature pick. It felt pretty doomed for Fnatic, but you know what Koi forgot about? They forgot that you can't take the rogue out of rogue time. It just is impossible. Sometimes mid-game is going to come around, and it is going to happen no matter what you say or do. I've read a bit on Twitter that instead of rogue time, it is now called coin flip, which I do quite like. I think it's a very creative way to do it, so I will be referring to it as coin flip from now on. But unfortunately for Koi, with that lead they were able to generate in the early game, they just weren't able to hold on. Fnatic realized that they have Sivir, and if they just group, they win all the 5v5s, and that's kind of what happened in this game. By about 15-20 minutes, Fnatic kept their cool, they kept their calm, they could have mental boomed, which, trust me, through the first couple games of the season, with especially how this Koi game started, I would have mental boomed. I have to give credit to this team for not doing that. They stayed cool, they stayed calm, they stayed collected, they grouped mid, and they were able to fight their way back into this game. Rekkles is going to be my player of the game. The Sivir was essential here. This is a huge pick for Rekkles, and it has been historically. Obviously, those front-to-back team fights have always kind of been where Rekkles has shined the most, I would say, but really getting him into a position where he can farm up, he can kind of play that traditional AD carry role of farm, team fight, right? That's kind of what ADC has always wanted to do throughout history. That's what Rekkles got real good at, and they kind of allowed him to do that here. I really like the flexibility that you have in your draft. You draft the Jace Gragas. Now, I'm not saying that you could flex those to different lanes, but Gragas can be played mid. Like, it is not impossible for me to see a Gragas mid, especially into something like a Ryze, if you did want to play that, if you wanted to move the Jace to the top lane, perhaps, if you saw a top lane matchup that was a little bit more exploitable than something like the Jax. But here, you just give the Gragas to Wunder and you bring that Jace mid. I think that's a relatively good draft. Razork on the Maokai looked so much better than he did in the first couple games. He looked completely lost in the first couple of games. He would get behind and they would have no idea what to do. Kind of the end of summer Razork experience from last year that I will say. He looked much more calm, collected, and composed in this game. He did get behind a little bit of an early lead for Malrang, like I said, capitalizing on that Jax in the top lane, but Razork kept it calm and was able to get that big Baron smite towards the end of the game. Without that, they're probably in a really bad spot. And so, shout out to Razork. He played a lot better, easily his best game of the split. And Rekkles and Rux continue to be the big strong point, in my opinion, for Fnatic. It's certainly not what I expected, but it's hardly like the scariest thing that I've ever seen, right? Like Razork and Humanoid didn't have a good regular season last year. It's not super surprising that they're not going to be the ones to jump out and carry this team in the regular season this year. That onus has kind of fallen on Reckless and Rux in the early couple of games, and it's good to see that they're at least performing up to expectations. I think their game 1 was really good earlier in the season, and then obviously this game 3 was really good this week as well. So hopefully they can continue that run. But for Koi, frustrating loss. Obviously, you had a chance to jump out to a 3-0 week here, and I think you would have been in a pretty great spot, feeling very confident if you jumped out to that 3-0 week. You had a good early game. You were able to get Wonder behind. You were able to get Sagenda ahead. Malrain got a lot of the gold, unfortunately, on the sedge, but you're able to do something like that. Unfortunately, you hit a point, and a break point with this comp where if you don't continuously play super aggressive and try to find these picks, you're just not going to be able to win these late game team fights. The Jax is really all of the late game damage that you're going to have, and it's going to be very difficult to get that Jax to stay on Sivir. And so Sivir's ending up just getting all this farm and grouping up, and you're really not going to win that front-to-back team fight. You have enough PL on the side of Fnatic to keep Jax off, and who else on Koi is really going to offer any damage? This Jhin pick, I'm really down on, whether it is as an ADC or as a support, really both. This is a pick, obviously, we've seen be really successful in solo queue, as a support in particular, but I think at the pro level, it just does very little. It does too little right now. ADC is a very strong role with a lot of champions that really need to have a lot of high damage, and Jhin just isn't in that ballpark. Comp did nothing this game. He felt completely irrelevant. I was tempted to give him my dud of the game, but he didn't really make any mistakes, so it's hard for me to give that to him. It's just like, was he even there? Did he do any damage? He didn't feel like he was a part of that game, and Comp is really the one that you want to be playing through on this Koi team. Obviously, he's the one who you want to have those mid-game power spikes. Koi got a lot better, Rogue got a lot better last year when they realized that Comp was going to be the one that was going to bring them from the mid to late game, and putting him on something like Jhin, I think, just takes away a lot of that possibility. But Koi, in general, didn't play bad. They, again, jumped out to an early lead. They just weren't able to keep it. It's not the worst loss in the world. This team definitely still has some demons that they need to overcome, though. Obviously, a lot of the problems that last year's team had, I think, are continuing into this year, but that does mean good things as well. I honestly think this team really hasn't changed all that much. I think if you looked at Rogue very positively by the end of the regular season last year, you're probably going to look at them very positively right now. I really don't think a ton has changed. I don't think it's quite Worlds Rogue with Odoamne, where they were just playing at that another level, but this very much feels like LEC Rogue from last year, just kind of transplanted into Koi's body. That can be a good thing, that can be a bad thing. Unfortunately, this loss to Fnatic is going to hurt a bit, but I'm not going to pull the plug or call a panic attack or anything like that because of this loss. For Fnatic, desperately, you needed this win, and you were able to pull it out. Big credit to Reckless and Rux. They continue to grow. Hopefully, they can actually be a PowerPoint on this map. If that's the case, Fnatic is going to be way better than I was giving them credit for in my power rankings, because Reckless and Rux were really the two players that I was concerned about. Now, that is also hinging on the fact that Razork and Humanoid get their shit together. They were so much better in this game than they were through the first two, but they got to keep it up. Wonder is kind of a rock on the top side. Big credit to him. He got camped to shit in the early game, just kept dying and kept his composure and was really good in the late game team fights like he always is on Gragas. I can't find a player champion combo that has more of a defined playstyle than Wonder on Gragas, not winning early and then being fantastic in team fights. That's just what happens when he gets this champion. Fnatic is looking okay. Certainly not a perfect week for the black and orange crew, but it definitely could have been worse. That's going to bring us to our final game here of Week 1 LEC action. A long video, a long week, and we get to talk about a very fun game to close it off. A battle of 2-0s as we had Mad Lions taking on Team Vitality. The yellow teams coming into contact, both of them 2-0, both of them looking for a win. Vitality is able to pick it up. Holy shit. I know I don't curse a lot on this channel. I am so excited about this Vitality team. I mean, I could not have asked for a better week 1 for a team that I am more excited about than Vitality. I mean, we just talked about, you know, Yike and Caps as a jungle mid duo to kind of take over the world, and especially to take over Europe. Bo and Perks, are you kidding me? How freaking good are these two? It is actually ludicrous how on the same page they always are. I think the best play to encapsulate this, and this is what I would check out if I were, you know, showing something off in the video. You know, if I am going to direct you to a play from this past weekend, go watch Bo's gank mid lane. I mean, Niski is giving all the respect in the world. He's basically standing at his tower. Does not matter. Perks goes all in. Bo's able to completely follow up, and it's like, if I'm Niski, I'm like, what do I do? Like, how am I supposed to play this? I'm literally sitting under tower, losing the entire wave, and they still kill me, and now I lose the wave anyways. Like, it's mind-boggling. Like, I don't even really know what you're supposed to do in a situation like that. When two players are just that good and that in sync, it is literally unbeatable. You want to give player of the game to either? Go ahead. Broadcast gave it to Bo. I'm going to give it to Perks. I still think Perks was awesome this game. He continues to outshine even the performances that he was offering himself last year, and he was second in MVP voting for me. He was really good last year, but he's having carry-oriented, flashy performances, which is just not what he was doing in 2022. I am over the moon with how these two are playing together. If Perks continues like this, he's an MVP favorite again this year, but he's got hard competition in his own teammate, in Bo. Like, how do you decide between the two of them? It's going to be, I fear that they're going to take votes away from each other as we get closer to the end of the season, but holy crap, are those two basically perfect as a duo. That's not even talking about Photon on the top side. He played Cassante this game, didn't really have to do much, and that's totally fine. I mean, we know when he's given the opportunity to carry games, he absolutely can carry games. He is phenomenal as a player and someone who I've only gained more respect for the more that I've watched him. This could be the best top side in the West by a large margin. Like now, like not in the future, like right now, they could be the best. That is insane. And to say that when you potentially have the best support in the West on your team in Kaiser, you know, maybe one of the more consistent teamfight AD carries in Neon, like this team is terrifying to have to play against, and Vitality only makes me more scared of them every single game. As for Mad Lions, it's a rough loss, but sometimes you're just like, what am I supposed to do, right? I thought Carzzy played relatively well here on the Lucian. Vitality with the rare strategy of taking away the Nami, actually breaking up the duo. You don't see that happen very often. That's certainly not normal, but Neon's able to play the Ezreal relatively well with the Nami. Nami's just stronger in general, in my opinion, and Carzzy has to settle for the Lulu, and shout out Halisang's Lulu. Let's get to Mad Lions now, baby. First of all, poor Niski. He was targeted over and over again in the mid lane. Only so much you can do on an immobile Victor, especially when you don't have jungle help. Elyoya was getting jungled circles around by Bo, although I don't think it was nearly as bad as some of the other performances we've seen this week. Bo certainly had full control over the map, even if Elyoya was trying to trade back in certain places. And poor Carzzy, man. Poor Carzzy. He actually played really well on the Lucian, in my opinion. Really good positioning. Was getting out a lot of damage in fights. Unfortunately, his support was like AFK this game, mentally. He had the most Hylissang play of all time, like the Haley play of all time. This is one of the peak Hylissang games in the history of League of Legends, because he makes the brilliant play of when the enemy team, when Vitality is sieging top lane inside their base, he flashes, he polymorphs the Ezreal, and everyone just walks away. And it's like, what is going on? This is another one of those moments where it feels like I'm losing my mind. Like, I watch this and I go, huh? Like, I have to double take it, and it's insane, but that's Hylissang. That's what you love about him. Fortunately, he's going to get my dud of the game. He was out of position a lot as a Lulu here. Tried to get a lot of vision this game, but unfortunately, Vitality did a really good job of scoping the map. Bo, in particular, was in a lot of good spots to be able to catch out the Lulu and to be able to punish the mispositions. And so, for Mad Lions, they were really looking at a spot where, like, this is the problem of what Hylissang caused last year, is he was just in these predicaments a lot against better teams in the league. Mad had a field day beating up on some of the bottom teams in the league. I think they're going to struggle a bit more against some of the better ones. Maybe this bot lane isn't going to be what we think it is. Although, let me just say, Carzzy, again, was pretty good in this game, and he definitely has been, in my opinion, the best player on this team to start the year. Maybe Niski, this game kind of sucked for him, right? It's not his fault, but it did kind of suck. Overall, where do I think these two teams land? Well, Mad Lions is good. I don't think they're great. I think they're one of those teams that is going to be in contention for being around the top of the standings. I don't know if they're necessarily, like, right there with the talent level. I would expect some other teams in the LEC to eventually be able to overcome them. Some of the ones that should be better than them that just aren't performing at that level right now. Teams like Excel, teams like Fnatic, they have the talent to be better than Mad. I don't think Mad is like ridiculously overpowered, but if those teams continue to struggle, this could be a team that definitely finds itself in the top 4 by the end of the single round robin. And then for Vitality, I mean, this team is looking at winning the LEC, and they absolutely should be. They have the best top side, like full top side in my opinion, in the LEC right now, and their jungle mid duo is right on par with basically anybody. They have a super stable bot side. I can't ask for anything more. The inevitable battle between G2 and Vitality is going to be an absolute blast at the end of next weekend, and let me tell you, I just cannot wait. All right, that is going to do it for my LEC Week 1 overview and analysis. Up on the screen right now, you're going to see the updated LEC standings. Any ties, of course, will just be broken in alphabetical order. In the first column to the right, you're going to see my updated power ranking numbers. In the second column, it's going to be how those have changed from the preseason or last week to this week. So let's go over the biggest risers and the biggest fallers. Starting with the biggest risers, it's a tie for 3 teams here. Vitality jumping jumping up from number 4 to number 2, Mad Lions jumping up from number 6 to number 4, and Team BDS jumping up from number 10 to number 8. All 3 teams exceeded my expectations this week. Mad Lions played some easier competition than the other 2, but I really do think that all of them sitting right around where they are now is probably where they will be, although Mad Lions might fall down when other teams start figuring stuff out. I don't want to punish some teams too much. Again, it's week 1. I don't want to try and overreact. That's why you'll notice that Excel is still sitting at number 5, even though they are the biggest faller of the week. I've seen a lot of people putting Excel at 7 or at 8 in the power rankings. It's just not where I'm at with this team. I still think they should be better than all of the teams that are below top 6. And until they prove to me that they are not, I am going to probably still look at them relatively favorably. They didn't look great against BDS, but they won the game, and their 2 big losses are to 2 of the best teams in the league, in G2 and Koi. So I'm not going to try to overreact and drop them to number 7 after week 1. If they continue to have problems, their schedule does indeed get easier. If they continue to have problems, they will fall down the power rankings. Do not be alarmed with that. But for now, I need to see it on the Rift. I need to see them lose to these teams before I commit to saying they're definitely not a top 6 team. Remember, bottom 2 are the 2 you don't want to be in. Astralis drops down to 10. SK drops out of the top 8 to number 9. I think those look like the 2 worst teams in the league right now. I think Heretics is kind of right on that border. BDS could definitely be jumping them in recent weeks if they continue to play the way that they are, and G2 made a really strong case to be number 1, so there they sit. Of course, if you have any disagreements, let me know down in the comment section below, but let's also talk about my player of the week and my dud of the week here in week 1 of the LEC. Of course, my player of the week is going to be Perks, the mid laner for Team Vitality. I see a lot of people giving it to Bo, and I totally understand. Bo gets 2nd place player of the week for me. I think another player that you could absolutely consider here is Yike for G2. Those 3 players played absolutely out of their minds this week. They were the easy, clear-cut choices for player of the week. But for me, I was most impressed by Perks. His ability to pull out the Azir and look incredibly dominant on it. Even the Rise game in game number 1, while it wasn't perfect, the 2 Azir games were so ridiculously good that it was a pretty easy choice for me to give Perks player of the week in week 1. If he continues on this pace, he could be in for another MVP level season. And then my dud of the week, unfortunately, in week 1 was also a pretty easy choice. It's going to go to Dior on Astralis. It's pretty clear that he is just outmatched and overwhelmed at this level. His teammate 113 was also in the conversation, but so were players like Marcoon on SK Gaming and even someone like Razork on Fnatic, who really just did not have a great opening week. I think Dior was a pretty easy choice, though, once I narrowed it down. So Perks is going to be my player of the week. Dior is going to be my dud of the week, but that is going to do it for my LEC Week 1 review video. Let me know what you guys thought down in the comment section below. Who am I overrating? Who am I underrating? You know all that jazz. I love to hear you guys' feedback. And of course, if you made it this far in the video, if you're an hour and a half into an LEC recap and you haven't hit the like button yet, I would really appreciate it. It does mean a lot to the channel. Of course, if you are new here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And I'm going to do a little bit of an extra plug here. I actually posted about this on my community tab yesterday, but I did start a TikTok and I'm posting YouTube shorts now. They're going to be condensed versions of these videos, little 30-second snippets of like what happened in the LEC in week 1, or, you know, what are my LCS power rankings. Going to be little snippets for those of you who want to check that out. The link to that is going to be in the description of this video, and of course you can check out the YouTube shorts on this channel if you are interested in any of those. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.